Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this beautiful presentation. Thank you very much for the invitation. Well, I have just here the monograph. I will reflect on the historical positive changes in attitudes towards animals in the context of the philosophy of art and aesthetics. I will look at an example from the world of painting, the painting of animals by the French painter of the second half of the 19th century, Rose Bonheur. At the very heart of philosophy is the self-display of man at the expense of animals, and this ontological paradigm persisted well into the 19th century. I would like to show how art, in our case, the animal painting, with responses to it, and we will try to re-evaluate this dismissive and condescending attitude towards animals. Through the artist's oeuvre, I will highlight how she imagined a community of people and animals, their interconnectedness through work and life, especially in a rural setting. In October last year, the Musée d'Orsay in Paris opened a major retrospective exhibition of Rose Bonheur's paintings to mark the bicentenary of her birth. She was thus paid back after almost 100 years of oblivion. As she rose to fame, she received all kinds of honors from the Salon of Paris, as well as political honors, receiving the highest honors of state from both the French and English authorities. In what follows, we will try to explain her rise, her decline, and the reasons for the renewed interest in her animal paintings. Our aim is not only to admire the virtuosity of the artist's animal painting, but also her extreme sensitivity in studying and exposing the emotional side of animals. She does not paint each animal impersonally, but a special, unique creature that is more than just a member of its own species. When she depicts animals together with humans, she shows how animals are all too often mere tools at the disposal of humans, how their relationship is almost mechanical, as if animals were mere living machines, where their well-being, their subjugation, and their suffering are irrelevant. It is through Rose Bonheur's work that her progressive ethics becomes apparent, and it is this ethics that makes her so contemporary, so special, and so worthy of attention in the context of animal studies. Her contemporaries were too little aware of the modernity of her thought. When younger artists who were turning away from figurative, realistic painting, for example, Paul Cézanne, were gaining ground, they reproached her remarkable ability to realistically depict animals as outdated. And so they were not sufficiently attentive to the ethical message of her art. Therefore, in my contribution, I will try to show that the notion of actuality, modernity, contemporaneity is relative, especially if we extend it beyond aesthetic frameworks. The value of Rose Bonheur's animal paintings lies increasingly in the fact that she has placed at the center of her images creatures that were previously either of subordinate, secondary, illustrative meaning, and anthropomorphized in symbolic, mythological, historical genre presentations. Bonheur, on the other hand, painted them in their ordinary, everyday interactions. She focused from her beginnings on animal painting, especially of domesticated animals used in agriculture, cattle, sheep, horses, and, as we saw it, dogs. Her artistic approach was realistic, even naturalistic. She first studied her animal models in detail in their natural environment, but also in urban settings, such as slaughterhouses. She was willing to do anything to make a true-to-life representations. I quote, "Oh, you really have to love art to endure in pools of blood in the midst of animal butchers. I also had a great passion for horses, and where better to study these animals than in horse fairs to infiltrate between the horse dealers." The end of quote. She made numerous sketches for each painting in which she wanted to record the anatomy of the animal, and she was well versed in zoo techniques. The naturalistic approach was supported by scientific study. However, scientific study did not go into a dry objective representation of the animals, but she strongly emphasized the psychological aspect. She highlighted the animals' well-being through their gaze, their posture, their movement, the atmosphere of the space, the landscape. Perhaps the appropriate label for her oeuvre would be psychological realism. Thus, the monograph Rose Bonheur, Une vie pour l'art quotes a thought that summarized her biographer and last wife, companion Anna Klumke. Quote, "I only enjoyed myself in the midst of these beasts. I studied their habits with passion. One thing I observed with special interest was the expression of their eyes. Is not the eye the mirror of the soul for all living creatures? Is it not there that the wills and sensations of beings to whom nature has given no other means of expressing their thoughts are painted so through their eyes?" even if her painting is realistic, the painted scenes are beautiful. As Sandrine Andrews notes in her monograph, her paintings show us an idyllic world of forests, pastures, field work, and the animals themselves. There is, in fact, she wrote, something dreamlike about the world of Rose Bonheur. The desire to paint the land, the mountains, the animals in what is most beautiful about them. She paints for us a world that no longer exists, or one that has never fully existed in this way. The end of quote. In her sketches and studies, Rosa Bonheur also used photographs, which were already available in the mid-19th century, but documentation was not her aim. Her first works were already a great success in the Paris Salon, which also held world exhibitions. She broke cliches. Despite being a woman, she had the strong support of her fellow French painters and art critics who held her in high esteem as animal painter. Among artists, she shared mutual admiration with Eugène Delacroix and was highly regarded by Camille Corot and the poet and art critic Théophile Gautier. She herself also greatly appreciated the paintings and studies of horses by Theodore Géricault, who was already said to have been distinguished by his modern sensibility, because he exposed the emotions of animals, including their suffering and misery. But critics note that Bonheur's canvases may be less heroic, but they're as real as it is possible to be. The French, the English, and the Scots all like the realism of her work. The former pointed out that Bonheur painted animals as she knew them in her everyday life. Her paintings were not committed to a historical genre, and animals didn't have a strictly defined, limited symbolic role. The painting of the horses being driven to the fair, Le Marché aux Chevaux, as we saw it before, this is parts of the same picture. Represents a link with the past, a link between tradition and modernity, because the Paris horse fair was already old, but it still survived in the capital. In Le Marché aux Chevaux, so this horse fair, the English discover modern way of representing animals with a deep sense of fidelity to reality, to the action, movement, and energy of the horses, while at the same time appreciating the painter's ability to preserve the morphological truth of the cold-blooded races. They found her more convincing than their painter Edwin Landseer, whose images of horses were too static and sweety. But her home by the woods at Fontainebleau, the artist had a veritable zoo, which would be very difficult to imagine in this way today. The main reason she had her own zoo was that the animals served as a model for her paintings, which she could spend hours studying and sketching, and it was home to many domesticated animals, as well as forest and wild animals. She also cared for the animals herself. It is known that at the end of their lives, she herself arranged for their deaths so that they would not suffer too much in their last moments. Unfortunately, not all the stories had a happy end. Among others, she domesticated a lion and a lioness who then had their own offspring. The artist's many promotional trips to France, to United Kingdom and the USA led her to hand over the lion family to the Paris Zoo, where the adult male and female became depressed and died a year later. When she wasn't promoting her new canvases, especially abroad, Bonheur lived a rather solitary life. She did not collaborate much with the painters of her generation, still less with the young Impressionists. Since she exhibited mainly in England, Scotland, and USA, she was less and less known to the younger generations in France. And this may have been one of the reasons why, despite her fame, she began to fade into obscurity towards the end of the 19th century. Let us look at the philosophical and art historical reasons for her decline, for the end. Figurative painting, including animal painting, flourished until the late 19th century. Later, in the 20th century, avant-garde movements brought revolutionary stylistic changes, and the hopeless existential situation of man to the fore, while the animal motive was less common. It has not entirely disappeared, however, if we only think of the Blue Rider art group and the importance given to horses by its founders, Wassily Kandinsky and Franz Marc. The return to animal painting, in our case to Rose Bonheur, from the second half of the 19th century, points to a change in the spiritual, ontological, and ethical paradigm in the relationship between human and non-human animals, as well as in the broader treatment of the environment and nature. In philosophy of art and aesthetics, it will be necessary to take into account the fact that the interest of the profession and the public is strongly influenced by extra-aesthetic criteria, and that the wider social and cultural environment and values have an impact on artistic creation and its reception. The notion of the autonomy of art will also have to be reevaluated. The fact that art is independent does not mean that it is untouched by social currents. Today, when animal studies are increasingly making their way into the art world, Rose Bonheur's paintings are also shining in a new light. Thank you.